Our presentation today is from Jim Oneill. Jim and his wife Sterling served for 13 years in team church planning in the Philippines. For 5 years, he led the graduate and undergraduate missiology programs at Liberty University, but also over 16 years led 3 different mission agencies through significant organizational change and fresh realignment to new audiences. Jim and Sterling now lead the Next Gen Leadership Movement, and Jim is presently the mobilization catalyst for Frontier Ventures. Jim has a special heart for getting alongside a younger generation, and we are looking forward to this presentation. Thank you, Jim.
Great. Thanks, Dave. All right, so posture matters. I'm going to take the next few minutes to take a look at a biblical apologetic for the alongsider in recruiting a new generation. Now, this is a PowerPoint, and I'm highlighting things through it, but I do want to encourage you to take a look at the paper where I spend a fair amount of time both explaining this and footnoting resources as we move along. So anyway, this paper will seek to orient the next generation of Jesus followers with the requisite holy postures for learning, loving, and teaching well to the ends of the earth with special attention for ministry among frontier peoples. We're going to look at scripture to discern and observe these missiological postures from 3 major sources. We'll note how God works with us to redeem lost peoples, then how Jesus models an incarnational praxis for his followers. We're going to conclude with a look at how the Apostle Paul pivots toward the Gentiles to become all things to all cultures. Now, to get through this, unfortunately, I'll kind of have to skim over the surface, but I'll try to get enough substance in there for us to get a handle on it. The need. What kind of alongsiders do we hope to send to what we in Frontier Ventures are now calling the edges of the least reached frontier peoples to serve well the gospel there? Our president, the president of William Carey International University, Kevin Higgins, made an interesting observation recently and documented. He's been a long-time veteran in mission work. He notes, sadly, there's littered mission work internationally is littered with broken families, fractured souls, burnt out laborers, shattered teams, men and women who stay on the field but retreat to the safe routines of mission administration and known Christian expressions rather than pressing into the far more challenging process of deep incarnational, humble servant living among the unreached. Challenging statement that just gives us some sense of context. So I would just suggest here in this idea of mobilizing alongsiders, we're just taking a look at a bit of a broader context for a moment, these realities, and then we're going to take a little bit more of a deep dive into alongsider. I'll define it, and then I want to walk us through kind of our 3-star witnesses, Yahweh and Jesus and the Apostle Paul. With Ralph Winter, I think it's already been duly noted, and all of us have benefited from his article, The 3 Mission Eras Perspectives in the World Christian Movement. And in there, from 1795 up to 2000, he highlights for us these key names: William Carey, Hudson Taylor, and William Cameron Townsend, among others, who made a significant contribution as pioneer leaders in taking the gospel in those days to the frontier and to the edges of the mission world. A second thought, I want to just make observation about the next generation. And my wife Sterling and I have been able and privileged to work with the next gen since 2003 in some sense of a organic structure where we bring together almost yearly a movement of young leaders globally who are in mission work to really press in to wrestle with issues that confront both their soul and their team and their task toward the edges of the world. So it's been a great privilege, and we have this real sense of sensitivity working with this group. Ages 25 to 40 is about the range that we work within this space. The third thought just to note is just the moral revolution that's really taking place in our culture, and it's having an incredible impact as this moral shift is taking place. And we're now the whole idea of understanding what constitutes family, personhood, gender identity. It's all being reasserted and reoriented in our culture, and it's having dramatic impact on those who are going to be coming in to serve the gospel internationally. And at this point, I just want to make one other point in this moral revolution, and this has been impacting every mission agency. It's impacting our society, and that's the reality of this access to porn and pornography in our society. And all the young folks coming into missions ministry now through North America, and maybe it's a global pandemic. I'm not sure, but the research done on it just highlights the fact that it is an issue here in America, and it has to be addressed. And it's something that mission agencies are really having to address and work on. In my paper on the footnote 5, Ronald Coetzee has this report on what cross-cultural workers ought to know about pornography. And that sort of research comes out of some of the friends that we're aware with through Proven Men, Proven Ministries, and some of their really important cutting-edge work in this area. And then finally, I just want to acknowledge and celebrate the fact that God is at work raising up majority world leaders, and they are responding to the call. And these movements to Christ that have been taking place, identified by David Garrison and others. And that's kind of what I want to ask and wrestle with in this alongside-er ideal is, can young emerging missionaries coming out of North America, is it possible for them to come and serve under or alongside what God is doing beautifully in the world with these majority world leaders and these movements to Christ that are taking place? So let's take a look now. Defining alongside-ers. I take a look in the paper. I give a whole series of ways in which alongside-er is defined. You know the name John Travis. NAVS has an author on a book on alongside-ers by Bill Mallory and our own Chung Kim within Frontier Ventures, and how each of them have defined alongside-ers along with some broader cultural usages of it. Just my thoughts here. Alongside-er for our purposes is the invitation to the next generation of workers to pursue mission to the edges of the frontiers of unreached peoples. From there, it will be most useful to consider how, as an alongside-er, they might be shaped and oriented toward future mission service with the needed spiritual DNA to thrive in service with these regions and come along majority world leaders as they lead in their pioneer efforts. A couple of brief thoughts here. And this word alongside, we're shifting right from preposition adverb to noun, and a couple of things to designate here that I am proposing for us as I think to orient this word alongside-er and then help to shape the postures. Designated, designed to come alongside individuals and people groups. Primarily operates by asking questions of individuals and cultures. Listeners of individuals and cultures. Releases their cultural identity in order to serve the culture and identity of others. Are fundamentally servants of Jesus who serve the lost for whom Jesus loves. Proximally present, seeks to understand, love, and witness to those in proximity to the host culture. Exercises their mission through hospitality and extending the welcome of God. Fundamentally captivated by the good news of Jesus and seeks to share this good news through the means outlined above. So those bullet points are just ways trying to help to orient this idea of an alongside-er and beginning to help maybe reorient young friends moving into mission and seeing what that might look like for the coming days. Now, what I'll do is just this brief survey through these three lenses. We'll start with God and then work our way then to Jesus and then the Apostle Paul. And then I'll provide a bit of a capstone on the 7 postures that I'm suggesting that we help these emerging leaders, our young friends, to begin to drive and orient their hearts toward. We've already begun to help shape in our next gen space some of these attributes, and I would just encourage that might be a starting point to help friends as they're beginning to give their attention, hopefully, in this next iteration of mission service coming out of North America, amongst the peoples of the world, considering the edges, And then taking a serious look, do we have the capacity as North Americans? Can we literally come under majority world leaders? Or are we the ones who need to be in the lead position in this effort? And I'm proposing with some of these postures, here's a way to consider we might actually then be able to also be part of serving what God's doing with this beautiful movement of majority world leaders. So our first one here is God with us. And what I'm proposing is God is the ultimate alongsider in this beautiful story here in Exodus chapter 3, God with us. And so as God enters into the storyline with Moses, he begins to introduce himself to Moses. And Exodus 3 is this beautiful integration of how God introduces a theology lesson to Moses. But what he does is he says, here's who I am, Moses. Moses, I'm going to put you on mission for me. So he says things like, go, and I'm going to send you. And the third piece of this amazing theology lesson is God says to Moses, Moses, get my people so that they might worship me. And so you have this rich integration of these three elements of theology. Who God is, Moses, go. Moses, here's the ultimate end. And I want you to call my people so that they might worship me. So just a few missiological thoughts here. Who God is must never be separated from what God does. His person and his purpose stand united. And I think that's profound to help disciple and train the next generation, because much of our theology separates the two. But let's bring them back together again. The other thing, I find it absolutely stunning, don't you? That God literally releases his rights and his power. He extends them to Moses, and he's demonstrating and modeling for us this amazing sampling of what an alongsider might look like. So then worship becomes the great ultimate focal point of the alongsider as the servant, to see the peoples, in our case, from every nation, language, people, and clan invited to come worship the true and the living God. Postures then for the next gen. Posture number one, I would propose becoming intimate with God, learning his character, his holiness, spending time on a long journey as a follower on mission, just to seek his presence, to know, love, and serve him. And then the second posture, learn to become a humble alongsider to those you serve. As Americans, we are uniquely blessed with education, resources, funding beyond the means of many in the majority world. Can we literally learn to release our rights to such power in our efforts then to come alongside those and take the task of the gospel to them? To this end, I find Paul's seminal insights on leadership as weakness, the thesis of 2 Corinthians, to be a profound aid in calling my heart and our hearts together to walk in suffering and spirituality. You know, and to that end, I've got in the footnotes, I want to highlight one book as just a great resource to consider. David Bosch's little thing. It was published in 1978. It's called A Spirituality of the Road. And in the book, he really helps to accentuate the place of 2 Corinthians and weakness in missionary service. So I commend that for our attention. So these are a couple of postures to consider coming out of and emerging out of Exodus. Second one would be Jesus as the alongsider. Now, if I asked you, as you're thinking about Jesus as alongsider, what passages might you want to develop? My mind immediately ran first to Philippians chapter 2, but I didn't use Philippians 2, which has got to be the great text, right? That's what Jesus does there. But I took two action passages, if you will, and we'll move through them really briefly here. Luke chapter 24 and John chapter 4, and these two great stories. The missiological implications. Luke 24, picking up the storyline there in verse 13 through, when Jesus on the road to Emmaus comes alongside and he meets up with the two disciples, and they extend this conversation. And the end of the conversation ends with this amazing picture where Jesus is in their home, cultural hospitality, blessing the breaking of the bread, and their eyes open up. And I find one of the missiological implications for alongsiders is mystery in the service of the gospel can be difficult to appreciate. We learn through the meal scene the fact that truth speaks into human hearts in many ways, not just through cognitive engagement and words, but many nonverbal cues as well. And to that, I want to commend to you Don Smith's book, Creating Understanding, and how communication takes place. And there's this beautiful element of mystery and I propose it as a missiological linker to just appreciating how the gospel got planted with these dear men. Jesus enters into their experience and starts right away where they are. He builds out through truth, through curiosity. Note the power of asking questions to arouse curiosity. He walks alongside these two men and ultimately imparts revelation to them. Sorry for the font size here. These postures coming out of Jesus. Number one, learning to ask questions is so basic to an alongsider's foundational posture that it almost gets neglected. But what a gift to see Jesus here. And I find it, don't you, amazing to see that Jesus brings curiosity to his task. And when he walks as a human being here on the earth, he's walking among men and he's utilizing these questions and then the listening skills. So when we're thinking about in the future with our young friends serving Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims, and how about even the near neighbor diaspora friends, wouldn't they be blessed by a beautiful gift, truly listening, present in that space, and great conversation? Second posture, the kitchen table, is the place where mission and community meet. Dr. Luke records 50 scenes in his gospel where something around meal, the breaking of bread, the table, elicits all these rich conversations. And this element of the oikos provides the setting scene for the relationships and the beauty of how the gospel is both lived and shared together. And so I would just propose, looking into the life of Jesus, a couple of postures to be an encouragement to our friends and maybe to our own hearts as well. Learning to ask questions, foundational, and then and developing the beauty and the power of the table, the hospitality, the oikos, the breaking of the bread. Most of the world lives there and they understand it. I think we in the West need a fresh orientation in this posture. Another passage, the woman at the well. You know the story so well, John chapter 4. Here we can learn to live in this tension of stepping into other cultures in such a way as to bring both the gospel and dignity to those who hear. What a beautiful picture of Jesus releasing this woman of questionable reputation to be his pioneer spokesperson to the entire community. And then think as well of the need for obscurity to allow the gospel to flow through those we're discipling. And we may never get credit here on this earth as the gospel begins to flourish simply because you are an alongsider. And so I think some of the missiological implications of a great story and much more could be said. How about one posture coming out of John chapter 4? Develop a lifelong practice of learning other cultures. Become an inquisitive learner and delight in other cultures around you. God has brought the peoples of the world to our shores here in America. As you consider what is called the diaspora, check my footnotes there as well. These displaced peoples have found themselves for various reasons as refugees in your near neighbor. Begin now to learn to love these neighbors and develop alongsider skills that will aid you in serving the marginalized, as perhaps in the future God might call you to be able to complement and serve these majority world leaders. Take a look at some of the resources that I have there that I think would be useful as discipleship tools. And then third here is the Apostle Paul. So I think it's a beautiful picture, God, the ultimate alongsider. We probably assume on God, that beautiful little preposition, right, with Jesus coming alongside. We see him walking with humans, engaging in human interaction, wrestling with the questions of the day, taking their burdens, their loss of hope, their doubts, their concerns seriously, sitting beside a woman at the well and unleashing her It's just a beautiful picture of what an alongside-er could look like, and then considering the attendant postures coming out of that. And I might challenge us that the Apostle Paul, probably no dispute here, the master contextualizer, just find it fascinating, these missiological implications for us. Paul rooted his mission service in Jesus, his cross, both for his own heart to declare allegiance to, and as central to bring to the Gentiles, those unreached who are far from God. His robust Christology guided his missiology. How he saw the many dimensions of the gospel allowed him to be faithful in presentation when with the Jews, and then when he was deep in the Gentile territory. And so here's Paul, right? He says, this cross, it is so beautiful, so robust, so rich, so profound. What are the questions you Gentiles are bringing? Okay, so you're interested in wisdom? Let me show you the cross. Now he's over here, right, with his Jewish friends. And he understood the questions of his Jewish friends. Boy, they wanted power, didn't they? And he was showing to them this gospel speaks to the questions that these cultures were wrestling with. And Paul in this great picture as the contextualizer. In chapter 1, it's the cross. In chapter 3, Paul says, do you know, Corinthians, as a divisive conversation you're having about who is the superstar, I want you to know it's not me, it's not Peter, it's not Apollos, it's God. Chapter 3, verses 5 through 10, 7 times Paul says, God invaded you, God invaded you, God invaded you, and I'm just on God's team. And then in chapter 9, we get to that amazing contextualization chapter, 19 times, verses 19 through 23. Right there, Paul says, I, me, my. Back to chapter 3, verse 10, when he says, I'm the master builder, that's archeton. He shifts the metaphors there, doesn't he? And here in chapter 9, he unpacks it for us, saying probably one of the most amazing things said by humans, right? I have become all things to all people so that by all possible means I might see some saved. Now here's the simple point. Paul says this, how I approach my audience impacts receptivity. I mean, that's stunning how Paul understood it, and it was probably a scandal to the people of his day. So I would just take this particular posture from Paul and what he was trying to teach us, the book of 1 Corinthians. Learn to love and get to know Jesus. Study all the Pauline passages where Paul provides rich and multi-textured pictures of Jesus and how these portraits address issues that surfaced in the life of the churches. As your love and knowledge of Jesus grows, allow this then to help shape how you pursue your own missiology. Let your mission flow out of a robust Christology. Paul's our model for this. Study how Jesus invades the cultures of the world, and he lets us participate. Then final thought here, Paul and dialegomai, just this rich picture in the book of Acts, right? As Paul enters into his task, chapter 13 and following, first half of his career, he spends all of his time on monologue. It's one-way preaching. Something happened in the middle of Paul's career where he shifts, and Dr. Luke notes it. And from that point on, most of the time, it's something around this idea of dialegomai. He's dialoguing in this pattern, and it's just beautiful. What did Paul learn in his journey where he shifts in his conversations? And even the word itself brings dignity, doesn't it? Learning the cultural patterns and how people think and listening well to them in this process. So what's the posture? I would propose learning the Luke Acts method of allowing the scriptures to speak to those who are not following Jesus, especially within the frontier peoples of the world. I want to introduce to you, it's a curriculum called the Catalyst. It's been used mightily by God. It was designed by Kevin Higgins, the president at WCIU, as I noted earlier. And he's been able to utilize this. And I would encourage you to see how the Luke Acts stories inductively introduced in conversation with communities of leaders and peoples of the world, and watch them begin to discover Jesus and how the Spirit of God works in this process. So the ideal of what an alongside-er means has the potential to capture the imagination of a new generation of gospel servants with the invitation to love well the other. This we know. God is at work in the world. Leaders in the global south and east are stepping into the hard places. He graciously continues his invitation, I hope, to us here in the West to bring his grand story of redemption to the world. And let me just give you, there's a snapshot of these postures, capturing it, becoming intimate with God, learning to be this humble alongside, releasing our rights, learning to ask the questions, get into that kitchen table where the place of hospitality unfolds with Paul, learning to love and get to know Jesus and learning to use this Luke Acts model for bringing inductively the gospel.